and that people like her, had no need for a program like this, because she said by her own admission that never in her life had she ever taken a drink outside of her own home. She had never been in a bar, in a cocktail lounge, or club-type atmosphere. And she says, to the best of her recollection, she had never in one 24-hour period ever consumed more than a half a pint of booze. Now, I remember the night that she was saying that. And as she was saying it, I was looking around the room, and most of us had jail records, prison records, Skid Row, divorces, and all of this. And here was this sort of little angel sitting in there. And I made a motion that we not accept her for membership. That's how dumb I was in the beginning. Of course, I got put down. The guys told me to sit down and shut up, because I didn't think, somebody like that really belonged in here. Because how could you possibly be an alcoholic if you've never drank more than a half a pint one day? At that time, I believed that alcoholism had something to do with the amount of liquor that you drank. But Patricia went on to tell how she came about being in attendance at that particular meeting. She lived in a city called Barrington, Illinois. Barrington is more or less a bedroom community to the city of Chicago. It's a very affluent neighborhood, very wealthy neighborhood. And her husband is a guy who I really didn't like, but I'll just call him Rudy for the sake of it. Rudy was a German, and I think in his hidden past he must have been a sergeant major in the SS troops under Hitler, because that's how he lived. He was a very dominant type guy, and he barked out orders, and everybody was supposed to heel whenever he opened his mouth. And he had a big advertising agency in the city of Chicago, which was doing very well. He was a very wealthy man with a lot of power. And they had 4 lovely children, whom I knew them all well. 2 boys and 2 girls. They're very active kids, active in school affairs, scouting affairs. As a matter of fact, one of the boys, held a record in the state of Illinois, and it still stands. He's the only boy in the history of high school athletics in the state of Illinois to be an all-state, first team participant in 3 major sports. And he was just an all-American kid, He's one of them kids that grows up to be an Eagle Scout and, does everything right. And the girls were the same way. And the whole family was a very active family. They participated in all the community affairs, and Rudy was always chairman of the Red Cross Drive or some crap like that. And Patricia always was running around as den mother and brownie mother and all of that kind of stuff that them kind of people do. And not the kind of a stereotype that you'd pick for an alcoholic. But Patricia told this little tale. She told of how one day her life had finally come to a point that she thought it was a real drag, that it was a bore. Because as the kids had gotten older and the husband had settled into his routine and was involved in the big power struggle in the advertising world, she sort of felt left out. She figured her life was nothing more than getting up in the morning, getting 4 kids off to school, driving Rudy down to the train station so he could catch the commute train into Chicago. And then she said all I had to do was come home and make a few beds, tidy up the kitchen a little bit, and that was it. She said because nobody came home until around 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. Rudy didn't get back to Chicago till then, and the kids, because of extracurricular activities, never got home till late. And she had all of this time on her hands. Now, alcoholics are basically perfectionists, and they always do things in a hurry, and she was no different. In order to fill up the time, she got to preparing the evening meal ahead of time. And she said there were some times when she'd actually have the house all tidied up, the beds all made, breakfast dishes cleared away, washed and cleaned. The evening meal would even be prepared, even to the point where she had it in the oven, covered with tin foil, ready to turn the oven on at about 3:30, 4 o'clock, to 3:25. She'd have all of this done. It wouldn't even be 10 o'clock in the morning yet. And she found herself with a lot of time on her hands. Now, most normal people, when they find a lot of time on their hands, they engage themselves in a lot of different kinds of activities, And she was no different. She knew she had to fill up these voids. And she joined things like the PTA and the Women's Club and the Garden Club and the Bridge Club and I remember she said she worked one day a week, at the Veterans Hospital, wheeling around the library cart and to the veterans. And she'd done the things that normal people do to occupy her time. And this seemed to fulfill the voids in her life. Until one day, when it wasn't a day to go to any of these clubs, it wasn't a day to go to the Veterans Hospital, it wasn't a day for nothing. And she had a lot of time on her hands, and she was moping around the house. She was sitting in the living room at about 10:30, and she happened to notice over in the record cabinet her husband's old collection of 78 records. Records they hadn't played in years, but her husband had been a collector. And she got over there, she started looking through them, and she put some of them on the record player to hear the music. And she said as she sat there on the couch listening to bands like Glenn Miller and Tommy Dorsey, all of a sudden her mind began to drift back into the past. Now in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, it makes reference that many of us drank trying to recapture the great moments of the past. And Patricia was no different, because all of a sudden in this sort of semi-reverie that she was in, she began to envision herself as a 17-year-old high school girl again. She was no longer a 44, 45-year-old lady and married with 4 kids. She was back, belle of the ball type of thing. And in order to enhance the reverie, the dreams, and to keep it from fading away, she went over to the liquor cabinet and she got out a bottle of sherry. She began to have a couple of sips of the sherry wine. And this made her remember, she thought, the high school ball and the boys asking her to dance and those innocent little scenes in the back seats of cars. And she liked it. And it was nice. And each time as the dream would begin to fade away, she'd go take a little bit more sherry to bring the dream back. And all of a sudden the phone rang. And she had fallen asleep. And it was Rudy calling from the train depot. And it was 7 o'clock at night, and she wasn't there to pick him up. And so she got down there to pick him up, and he started raising hell in that dictatorial manner that he had, and he smelt the sherry wine on her. And he gave her the ultimatum. He said, from now on, I don't want you drinking. If you drink anymore, I'm going to divorce you. Now, that's a hell of a threat to place on a woman who 90% of her life, has been the epitome of what a lady would be. And the threat was there, loss of income, loss of economic security, shame, embarrassment, ego, all of these things, loss of home. So she got scared, and not even thinking that she had a problem, and understandably, with alcohol. She said, don't get excited, Rudy. If that's what you want, I just won't drink anymore. And she meant it, because drinking had never really been a problem in her life. And she didn't drink anymore for about 3 months. Then all of a sudden came another one of them days. And then she began the pattern of the alcoholic. She began to make a deal with alcohol. Because this time she said she was going to play the records and listen to the Glenn Miller songs. And she was going to have a little wine, but this time she wouldn't drink as much. This time she wouldn't drink as often. And she even went ahead to set the alarm clock, just in case she fell asleep. She began to make all the preparations, all the efforts that we go through, during our alcoholism to keep from being exposed. And it didn't work, as it doesn't work with any alcoholic. As soon as she took one drink, she wanted another. 2 brought her back to 1940. She wanted to go back further than that. She wanted to hear the music better, so she had 6. And before you know it, it was time to pick up her husband at the depot. And she hadn't fallen asleep, but she had had a little bit more than she usually had. And in her haste to get down to the depot, in the snow, on the ice, she skidded the little station wagon. And she caved the front end of the station wagon in right into the guardrail in the parking lot of the depot. Standing right there was Rudy. And Jesus, Mr. SS himself, He come out with all them sort of expletives that them people are famous for. And again, he told her, this is it. The next time you drink, we're divorced. Well, that scared her enough that she had recalled seeing a little article in the personal section of the local paper. Need help with a drinking problem? Call AA. So she called up the number, and a lady made the call on Patricia. And she brought Patricia that very night to her first meeting in Barrington, Illinois. And I happened to be there. And I heard her say the things that I have just heard you say, that I've just said to you. And so I almost justify my saying she doesn't belong here. Because I ask you, does somebody like that represent an alcoholic problem? My God, only 10% of their life has been in a little bit of chaos on account of having a few drinks too many. If you have to work for somebody, Jimmy is the kind of a guy you want to work for. He's what you would call a boss's boss. I worked for him on many occasions. He was a construction superintendent.